Well, hello everyone. Is the sound on my mic okay? Apparently it was booming a little bit this morning, but it is better. Okay, good. So welcome back, and again, thank you for being here, and thank God for our meeting and our experience together. And we're moving forward now in time in the biblical story. And this is kind of the way I take the Bible in 7 stories in the book that's available there, or some of you have on the table back there, is in a paradigmatic form. In other words, it's not just random. And it's not accidental. There is something profoundly true about it. And it begins with a class of people that's described in the book who are known as the Hapiru. And this is an established name that comes from both Egyptian epigraphy, written material in Egypt, and in Babylonian epigraphy. The pronunciation is slightly different, but this was a class of people. Hapiru, it probably has a kind of like a fricative beginning there, that was known throughout the ancient Near East during the 2nd millennium before Christ. So in other words, we're dealing with that name. You're dealing with a bunch of people who were known by the powerful structures, the power structures of the time, as disreputable, stateless, untrustworthy, dangerous, treacherous, able to sell themselves out as mercenaries for different groups, different chieftains, petty kingdoms, petty kings, and altogether disreputable and disgusting. Does that remind you of anyone today?
Yes.
All right. You got a volunteer back there. Yeah, so the undocumented, and they were definitely filled the role of immigrants at that time. And they had that. So, for example, you can look up something called the Amarna letters, which are from something like 1400 years before Christ. And they were discovered at the Tel Amarna, which is an archaeological dig in Egypt, northeast Egypt. And it tells of the Hapiru as somebody that the king, that is in Egypt, needs to protect a local chieftain from. In other words, they're liable to come in and overthrow a little kingdom. They were warlords and mercenaries, as well as indentured servants, slaves, whatever. They were the offscouring, the detritus of empire. Any empire is going to have those who don't do well and have to survive as well as they can. And that means moving into territory that they could possibly take over, or finding protection from a local king, a local chieftain, or engaging in a revolution. And so once this sociology, this historical sociology, is opened up to us, then the Hebrews, the Hebrew people, find a much more credible niche as an historical reality, an historical people, than just appearing kind of out of the sky, or that Abraham should have descendants and they should mysteriously somehow end up in Egypt in conditions of slavery, after they were descendants of the Grand Vizier Joseph, who had risen to supreme power. So how did they go from that position of immense status and to slaves. So the story, the archaeological sociology that we can gain about the Habiru allows us to understand who the Hebrew people are. And of course, the word Hebrew is very close phonetically to Habiru. You only have to get rid of one vowel, and it depends on how you pronounce it. It's almost immediate. And so the ancestry of the biblical Hebrews becomes much more intelligible. That doesn't mean to say that there weren't ancestral figures like Abraham or Joseph or Jacob, memories of ancient, highly significant individuals who left a story behind. But the class of people, the people who actually came out of Egypt, who constituted the Exodus experience, were Habiru. They were led by someone called Moses, who took someone who had to have the role of Moses. They had to be led. And Moses was a prophet from all accounts, and he had a vision for these disempowered, disenfranchised, stateless people. But once you begin to see that, you see that God doesn't intervene randomly and arbitrarily on the side of this one individual, even though Abraham does result in the story of Jacob, as I was describing, these great stories. But, as a people, why him rather than anybody else? But when you get to the level of the people in the Exodus, the story of the Exodus, which comes directly after Genesis, it tells us about the origins of the biblical people. It makes a whole lot of sense that there is an intervention on the part of God on behalf of a dispossessed, stateless, dehumanized people. I will lead you into a land I will show you, and you shall have no other gods but me, and I will give you a law, and I will give you a land to create a people. So what is that but an intervention, an historical intervention? I mean, I'm reading it, obviously, and people could dispute it either from a genetic Israelite point of view, that there's this one racial identity, one ethnic identity with the same genetic markers going all the way through, and that's what counts. Or that God intervenes through Moses, through the prophet Moses, on behalf of a no people. You were once a no people, now you are a people. A group of people who are nothing, who don't have a sacred order, and they don't have a history of conquest and a kingdom that's going to make them, like Rome, the glory of Rome, the story of Rome, the 1,000-year story of Rome that they're so proud of. If you don't have that, and Egypt the same, which is going on for even longer, 2,000 years more since the Great Pyramids, if you don't have that, what do you have? Now, if you're just an arbitrary genetic group chosen by God, and God battles for you, so he's going to defeat the Canaanites and the Midianites or whoever, then you replicate the order of empire, but with a God who is very ambivalent about empire. He gives rules about the poor and about the stranger in the land. You will not mistreat the stranger in the land because you were strangers in the land. That comes up multiple times in all the different sources, the Old Testament sources. So this God has, again, we're talking about what is the nature of God? Who is this God? Now, if this God is a God who's just recreating an empire for a distinct genetic group, rather than trying to change the way in which I will give you a law that is different from the laws of the nations, and you will not have gods like the nations, because those gods, they represent this, they incarnate the violent sacred, according to Girard, that any idol has to be a condensation of a sacrificial crisis and its resolution in a victim who then becomes mythologized. So is God doing that, or is God doing something new? And then if you say, well, actually he chose a people who had stories, but they were dispossessed people, they were nobodies. And as we learn in the book of Numbers, that they went out with the Habiru, the Hebrews, went out a mixed multitude. That's the name. A mixed, that is a kind of a mongrel multitude, people who were not racially identifiable. They were just, they were people, they were hangers-on. If you have nothing and you see a movement, you say, well, these people are getting out. Something's happening here. I'm going to hang on with them. I'm going to tag along with these. Because it looked, I got nothing here. They're going to kill me, or they're going to whip me to death, or whatever. But at least these people have got some movement to them. And that is the argument in 7 Stories about the origin of the Israelites. There were stories. There were family members. But the group, the Exodus group, are a distinct class of people mobilized by Moses with an ethic of radical justice and non-sacrificial, even though they used sacrifice, but it was not covering that up. And there was a sense that the structures that create poverty, that is alienation and loss and dispossession, those were no longer to be replicated among you. There shall be no poor among you, as it says in Deuteronomy. So it makes sense that God, when he says, I heard the cry of my people, I've come to, well, I'm thinking about Sodom and Gomorrah, where he said, I've come down to find out what's happening, but I've heard the cry of my people. I've seen their suffering. I've seen the way in which their taskmasters drive them, and I want to lead them out of freedom. That refers to the historical reality of human oppression, among whom there were certainly distinct individuals who had the experience, shall we say, of Jacob, the experience of wrestling with God. And they passed that on. That's the story. But it did not have exclusive genetic boundaries. In fact, rather the reverse. They would gather people to themselves. So that's what's presented in the 7 Stories as the origin of the Habiru people. And the first time we meet Abraham, or Abram as he is then, in the book of Genesis is in chapter 14, chapter 12, but in chapter 14, the first time he's referred to as Hebrew, it says, Abram the Hebrew. That's the first time that word's come up. Never before there in the Bible. Abram the Hebrew was sitting under the oak of Mamre in the heat of the day. And then news came to him of his nephew Lot, who had been taken captive or something by a confederacy of 5 kings. So we have this fairly random story of 5 kings. And then Abraham, who disposed of a force, somewhat like Esau's, I think it's 386, something very specific. 386, Mac would probably be able to tell me. No, that's Esau. I think Abraham's in the 300s. But anyway, he disposed of a force of armed men. In other words, what was he? He was a warlord. He was a local warlord who had these men, who was a Habiru, who was dispossessed, but they were able to hire their services out to kings and petty chieftains, and win victories for themselves and gain territory or whatever. And that is exactly what he did. He defeated this confederacy. And 5 kings probably wouldn't amount more to probably 300 or 400 men themselves. And Abraham had this famous battle in which he rescued Lot. So there we have an origin. And there's other stories like it that show you the social origin, the social context in which the message, the revelation of the Bible arose. So God reveals God's self to a non-people. Why would he do that? Why would she do that? Why would God do that? Unless it's a different kind of God from all the gods of the nations. Unless there's something new entering into history. And Gerard says in more than one place, but I get it from his small book, Sacrifice, he says there's nothing more mysterious in world history than the existence of a literature that brings to light the victim. In human culture, we should do anything but that. Should include and cover that over. So to have a literature that is on the side of the non-people, the nothing, and say, I'm going to be with you, I'm going to lead you into a land, is an explosion of human novelty in the world. Now that gets covered over by stories of nationhood, the book of Joshua, of the kings, and God says to Samuel, well, all right, if they want a king, let them have a king. We'll see what happens then, you know. Like God is so kind of like reactive and non-directive in some of these instances. You know, just, you know, again, it's what is the character of this God? And the book is working at that. The book of the Bible is trying to unearth what that is. And so you have this revolutionary origin in the Exodus story, and someone like Norman Gottwald says the Exodus group, and of course it's hypothetical, the Exodus group joins with a Canaanite group that is itself revolutionary against the series of kingdoms. And if you go to the book of Judges, I think it is, the number of petty kingdoms that were not defeated by Joshua is, I think it's 32. So it tells you the number of petty states, and these are petty states that would not extend more from this wall to that wall over there in terms of a walled city space, but it was defensible, and they'd have a class of professional soldiers like Abraham did, except he was out under the yoke of Mamre. He didn't have a city because he was happy ruled, but all these little chieftains, they had their spaces, and there was a revolution, according to Norman Gottwald, in Canaan, which the Exodus group gave the founding ideology to. It has to be to do with God. It has to be, look, there's a God who's on our side. And he does not want to replicate the structures of oppression and alienation and dispossession. This is a complete novelty. It's a novelty in human history. And it goes on from there. And the great thing, as I once said to a Jewish colleague in the Department of Religion, and she was intrigued by the answer. She said, well, what is special about the Bible? I mean, she was asking me. I said, what is special about it is the continuity of the story of liberation. People are going to be people all the time. They're going to do all sorts of crazy stuff and bad stuff. Everybody will do it. But in this book, there's a continuity and that is the miracle. To pass on this revolutionary doctrine or revolutionary praxis from one generation to another in such a way as it's both preserved and enhanced. It gets better as it goes along. That is a categorical miracle. Because culture is culture with us guys, with human beings, is everything. It's what makes us who we are. And to change it, to create something new, is difficult. It's extremely difficult. Because that's what this is. It's a whole set of programming from Mummy and Daddy, God bless them, and others like them. But then something comes along and begins to set me free. What is it? What's the Holy Spirit? What is that? What is that? The name of Jesus, the person, the story of Jesus, the Bible. Suddenly I begin to have a conversation of what it means to be a human that is different from what's given to me, what's set for me. and I am free. And I can breathe. I know I have to pick up the pieces. I have to carry on. I'm a human being. I still live, and I'm still have my own story. But there is a way forward. And that's what the Bible is. It's this way forward through history, and through a very particular history to begin with, the people of Israel. And so the people of Israel, they get their land, and then they're taken off into exile. Now, why is that? What is that about? They had their kings. When you get taken off into exile, the normal thing you do is assimilate, or you would think. Because how are you going to get on? How are you going to overcome the trauma of exile and the loss, the dispossession? You have really nothing. Well, I have to sidle up to somebody and say, I'll join your clan and I'll join your religion, and we'll do the crazy things you do, and we'll be the same as you. But the thing about the exile that we read about first of all in Jeremiah, who's saying, get used to a long time out there. You're not going to come back quickly. That itself is a miracle. He's saying, don't assimilate, but don't resist. This is important for you to be out there. And so the relationship of getting the land, so you have a people who are non-people, or no people, dispossessed, and then they get a land that God gives them, because there's a revolution, and they establish that there's a confederacy of tribes. I mean, it has to be the case, because that's been passed down, and it has that archaic sense to it. But then they say, well, we want a king. We want a king to lead our army. Who's going to lead our army? That's what a king does. Richard III or whatever, on his horse. Everybody for God, King Harry and St. George, off we go. That's what a king does. And then that goes on, the prophets come along and say, you're not caring for the poor, you're worshiping idols, and they go hand in hand, those things. And God is not happy with this. So in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 28, we get a whole bunch of curses. We have some blessings before that, but we have curses before that. Verses, I'm going to read 47 to 58 here. And it says, the bad stuff that's going to happen if you don't keep the law of the covenant. And, kind of in the way the thing is set up, in the literary construct that it is, this comes out of the mouth of Moses when he's standing on the shore of the Jordan. But everybody knows, all historical and biblical critics will say, this is composed afterwards. Exodus is more nearer the events. Deuteronomy is a late composition, very, very successful composition. It founds the identity, basically, of the Jewish people in exile, the Israelite exile. It's what they can hang on, because they said, oh, yes, this makes sense. We were thrown out because we were bad. We're not going to be bad again. So you've got to think about that. When they come back from exile, there's this big thing not to incur the wrath of God again. In Ezra and Nehemiah, those are the books to read about the mental condition of the people when they return from exile. Very, very instructive. But anyhow, here's the warning that we get in the book of Deuteronomy, verse 47. And he says, because you did not serve the Lord your God joyfully and with gladness of heart for the abundance of everything, therefore you shall serve your enemies whom the Lord will send against you. In hunger and thirst, in nakedness and lack of everything. He will put an iron yoke on your neck until he has destroyed you. This is the voice of God. You've got to think about that. This is the voice of God in this part of the tradition. The Lord will bring a nation from far away, from the end of the earth, to swoop down on you like an eagle, a nation whose language you do not understand. a grim-faced nation, showing no respect to the old or favor to the young. It shall consume the fruit of your livestock and the fruit of your ground until you are destroyed, leaving you neither grain, wine, and oil, nor the increase of your cattle and the issue of your flock until it has made you perish. It shall besiege you in all your towns until your high and fortified walls in which you trusted come down throughout your land. It shall besiege you in all your towns throughout the land that the Lord your God has given you. In the desperate straits to which the enemy's siege reduces you, you will eat the fruit of your womb, the flesh of your own sons and daughters, the Lord your God has given you. Even the most refined and gentle of men among you will begrudge food to his own brother, to the wife whom he embraces, and to the last of his remaining children, giving to none of them any of the flesh of his children which he is eating, because nothing else remains to him. A horrible, terrible, fearful curse. But I would say with the marks of experience. This is supposed to be prophecy before this is prophecy after the fact. It's supposed to be prophecy before. But the vividness of that, the sense of a stern face, the language you don't understand. Somebody comes rolling in and barks orders and yells at you, and you haven't the foggiest idea what they're saying. And then when you're under siege, you're reduced to eating the flesh of your weakest, the infants. That has all the marks of real human experience. This is not rhetoric. And so it is prophecy after the fact that the writer of Deuteronomy wrote in the experience of exile. This is the formation of Judaism, part of the formation of Judaism. It's very important to understand this is part of the formation of Judaism because it's very natural and very understandable that if you are chosen by God and you retain that relationship, because the prophet says, you have this relationship, and you figure out why this happened, it's because all these terrible things, which are now memories of the people in exile, they happened because we did not keep the law. This is a way of making sense of what happened to you and of making yourself the guilty party in order that you maintain that relationship with God, who might ultimately bring you back from exile, which Jeremiah prophesied, and in fact did happen, which was the wonderful miracle of Isaiah. So you have Deuteronomy, written sometime in the years in the 6th century, the 500s before Christ, and then you have Cyrus, the king, the new power on the block, the king of Persia, whom we are currently making war on, because plus ça change, plus la même chose. He came along, and he conquered Babylon, and he said to everybody, and it's recorded in what is known as the Babylon cylinder. It's a little engraved clay whatever this shape is, cylinder. Thank you very much. Yeah, Babylon is engraved how I set them free, how I set the people of Israel free, and other peoples as well. So Cyrus was an enlightened man, whatever it was, whatever the spirituality was in him. He was kind of like a Moses figure, but from another nation. And Isaiah, second Isaiah, calls him the Messiah. I will anoint Cyrus. He's a foreigner who becomes the Messiah of the people. He brings them home, just like Jeremiah said would happen. So they come home, but the one who prophesies, who talks about talks about Cyrus, he has a very different voice, an extremely different voice. How does second Isaiah, whom we're talking about, how does he begin? Or she, could be the she. How do they begin? Well, yes, that's exactly right. Comfort, oh, comfort my people, says the Lord. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and cry to her that she has served her term, that her penalty is paid, that she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins. So something new begins with Moses, a land and a law for people who are not people. Then they accommodate to the nations like the way everybody does. It's nothing peculiar. They assimilate, they behave, well, let's have a king the same as the nations. Then they get brutally carried off into slavery. And before them, the northern tribes, the people were carried off by Assyria. So they went first, and then it was Judea and Benjamin later on. They have this experience of alienation, and then this voice arises in parallel with Cyrus. Speak tenderly to my people. Comfort, comfort, O my people. So suddenly, and it's full of feminine imagery. If a mother should abandon her child and forget the fruit of her womb, I will never do that. So there's some new sense here that goes beyond the initial choice of the people and the creation of people. This is a relational sense of tenderness and compassion. A new, like they discover rare earths. Rare earths are very important for computers and that kind of stuff. That's as much as I know. But this is like rare earth that people didn't really know before. And that constitutes a critical part. That's why it's like a rare earth. It makes a new technology possible. But this is a technology of relationship. There was a relationship before. Exodus was a relationship, for sure. And they preserved that with the prophecy of Jeremiah. And Jeremiah has some very tender bits. Like, I will write my law in their hearts. It sort of anticipates 2nd Isaiah. But here, there's that explicit note of tenderness. And then in 54, chapter 54, verse 7, it says, for a brief moment, I abandoned you. Now, this is a prophet speaking, right? It's not Isaiah. It's not Jeremiah saying, "Get used to it, plant orchards, vineyards, that kind of stuff. Marry your sons and daughters." Practical stuff. This is the movement of a heart to a heart. And he says, "For a brief moment, okay, I abandon you, but with great compassion I will gather you." Great tenderness, in overflowing wrath. And the overflowing sense is like slopping over. It's like kind of a mistake, carrying a bucket, and you don't carry it carefully, and it's got water, and the water slops over. In slopping over wrath, for a moment, I hid my face from you. But with everlasting love, I will have compassion on you, says the Lord, your Redeemer. So out of exile, out of the experience of having lost everything, and yet still hanging on somehow or other to the relationship, and then this historical moment with Cyrus saying, well, you can go home. What? Yeah, go home. It's okay. And they go home. And then the prophet says, this is God's compassion. This relationship we have with the God who set us free from slavery to begin with, this God is still with us and is now manifesting God's own heart. God's, like a mother, like a lover, absolutely proximate to you. It's not, okay, I'm a tough God who can set you free from the Egyptians. I can deal with their firstborn if I have to, and I did. But no, this is the relationship I want you to have. I want you to experience the compassion, everlasting love. I will have compassion on you, says the Lord, your Redeemer. So this is a qualitative new event in the biblical story. So you could see how the construction of humanity is going forward. The construction of humanity out of violence. Because the Exodus was constructed out of violence. You see what I'm saying? That God had to slay the firstborn to bring in the story, as the story goes, to bring the people out. But now, in complete helplessness, the people have no force, they have no army, they have no king. In complete helplessness, God has... So this new element of gratuitous compassion and feeling without violence enters into the narrative and the text. It becomes part of the textual history, the actual written material. So on a Sunday or Saturday for the Jewish people, they would get up and, finding the passage that was due to be set for that day, Jesus said, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me." They read it regularly by rote. They would read this. So this enters into people's minds and hearts. Who God is. We have had a schizophrenic or schizoid understanding of God. People have remarked on it. God could be nice, God could be nasty. We don't really know for sure how he's going to be. But we just accept it. That's the way it is. That's what the Bible does. But actually, if you read the Bible thematically in terms of this intervention in human history on the part of the stranger, should we say, the no people, and you read it progressively, that history begins to unfold this thing progressively because new occasions, new situations arise that makes other experiences, other phenomenalities possible. Like, I feel something different than I did before. This is different. And it's a different kind of relationship. It's a relationship of tender love that I will not abandon you again. I did it before. It's okay. I'm not going to do it again. All right. You have to learn to believe that, And along with Second Isaiah, and this is the other bit of the presentation, is embedded in Second Isaiah, as you all know, are the 4 songs of the suffering servant, which were not distinguished as separate entities until the 19th century. Some biblical critics said they were poetically connected and they were thematically the same, and therefore they should be identified as 4 songs of this individual, the suffering servant. So the first of those songs, the first of those poems, shall we say, in chapter 42, 1 to 4, says this: "Here is my servant, whom I uphold, my chosen, in whom my soul delights. I have put my spirit upon him. He will bring forth justice to the nations, plural. He will not cry or lift up his voice, or make it heard in the street. A bruised reed he will not break, and a dimly burning wick he will not quench. He will faithfully bring forth justice." Faithfully. In Paul, faithfulness and faith are the same thing. And Christ is the supreme example of faithfulness and faith. "He will not grow faint or be crushed until he has established justice in the earth. And the coastlands, including Australia, are waiting for his teaching." In other words, there are 4 songs about this critical individual, and the first song characterizes this individual in what way? He will not cry or lift up his voice or make it heard in the street. A bruised reed he will not break, and a dimly burning wick he will not quench. What does that feel like? Mercy, gentleness, nonviolence. This person is not responding with nonviolence. We have never seen that character of the servant before, because by the time you get to the 4th song, we're not going to go through more in detail, but by the time to get to the 4th song, he says, "It has pleased God to lay upon him the iniquity of us all. Because of us, He was bruised for our sins. He was crushed for our iniquities. That has played in to a version of atonement, which is penal substitution. And every time you hear this, we are so conditioned as Christians, that is, auditors of the text, that we hear penal substitution. That God really had to beat up on Jesus in order to be okay with us. That does not correspond at all to the relationality of 2nd Isaiah. I have engraved you on the palm of my hands. Even if a mother would abandon her children, I will not abandon you. Speak tenderly. It doesn't correspond to any of that. It's just a mystery. And you can parse the text to see how that mystery works. And I'll show you a bit in a minute. But basically, it's the mystery of nonviolence, bringing about the righteousness of the people. You wouldn't think that we need it because we're sacrificial. We need to discharge our sinfulness on a victim, maybe a little lamb in the temple, or Jesus, the Lamb of God. Okay, that seals the deal. That does it. That's how we would understand it. We've offloaded it, and it becomes a Christian thesis that we've offloaded our wickedness on Jesus, and He's taken it. He's taken the hit, and so we're good. We're all good, everyone, because of that. No. This is a new phenomenality of the suffering servant who is nonviolent, and somehow that takes our unrighteousness away from us. How does that work? You see somebody responding violently, like Gandhi, for example, like Martin Luther King. What does that do to you? How does that make you feel? It reduces the violence inside you. It dials right down. It goes right down inside you. You don't feel like, when someone retaliates against you or aggresses you, you feel like retaliating. And you see someone retaliating, that makes you want to retaliate. But someone responds nonviolently, that dials that thing down inside you. And when, as in the gospel, that comes from God, that is not just a human construct. That is from the Father. Jesus says, none of you know the Father, only I know the Father, and those to whom I reveal him. What a claim. Only I know this God we've been talking about for 1,500, 2,000 years. Are you mad? Are you so filled up with yourself that you could say something? No, he says, there is a different way of relating in the world. It's not that he is the second person of the Trinity and therefore he's mysterious up in some metaphysical heaven. I'm not completely trashing that. I mean, that has its role. That the metaphysics of the first 5 centuries or whatever has its role. But much, much more relevant and urgent today is the fact that Jesus is saying, anthropologically, you do not know God. You do not know the Father. I do, and I will show it to him to you, her to you, if you want. Now that is an intervention that actually outdoes Exodus and outdoes Isaiah as well, 2nd Isaiah. Because it's not just good words, and it's just a mysterious figure of the suffering servant. It's somebody whom we can locate in history, and we do. He's an historical figure who decided to go that way and left a mark on those who knew him, his followers, who didn't really understand what he was doing. But it did that thing. It dialed badness down inside you. So you become more righteous. I'm not going to retaliate. Why should I want to hit you or hurt you? Because this other person has entered in my life and put me in a much better place. Why should I lose that? I mean, it's possible this other person could annoy you so much that you do lose the feeling of Jesus, but he will come back, no doubt about it. But that's the message. He's entered into our human sphere, our human space, through that continuous story. It does not drop out of the sky. There's a story, there's a written story, there's a textual story, which we can read and we can hear. And that's Gerard's argument. He said he learned this from the text. He learned whatever we were talking about first thing in the morning, this morning. He got it from the text. The formidable, constraining power of the scriptural text. It's something you learn by listening to this stuff. And of course, Jesus concretizes it enormously. And then we build a kind of religion out of it, you know. We have bishops and presbyters and all the rest of it. And of course, it's what human beings do. And there's no shame in that. But there is this continuous, soaking, transformative narrative that we are, you know, if there's a show you like on TV and you go back to the show again and again, you know, not looking at anybody here. But anyway, but this is the show we go back to. This is the show that I like that show, and I like that character. I like that person in the show, and I'm so sad it's finished. I hope they have another season, you know. This is another season. We're in another season of this show. And it's very important that to understand that. We're not just walking along like robots in this kind of religious pattern so that after this life finishes, we've got to be okay. No. I mean, I don't deny, I want to be okay when I die, but I don't particularly care. You know what I mean? It doesn't bother me a great deal. That question doesn't bother me. What does bother me is this, is being here, breathing this air, this beautiful planet, which we flew across the Pacific, that endless Pacific, to come to you. And it's just astonishing, all that water, you know, and that water is the lungs of the earth. Or they're part of it anyway, and that is so precious. Why would we would say, well, with Peter Thiel, let's go to Mars, or with Luther and Pope Gregory, whoever he was, let's go to heaven. No, let's complete the creation that God intended through the transformation that this text brings, because we can't do it without the transformation this text brings. We can't. I couldn't anyway. I just could not behave in a different way in relationship to all the world and to all its problems. I could not do it. And of course, we need each other to do that. Anyway, I'm now beginning to ramble on, but I just will read the last bit of the fourth song in the Suffering Sermon, which we're used to. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth, like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like sheep that before its shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. We've interpreted that in terms of sacrificial offering, and it's so easy to do. You could see it was a mistake waiting to happen. But if you see it as a description of nonviolence, it suddenly pops off the page in terms of our own time and our own lives. He did not retaliate. Why? Well, it says here, the righteous one, my servant, shall make many righteous, and he shall bear their iniquities. And that makes sense. Like, he took this crazy way of being human on himself, the violent way of being human, in order to undo it and translate it into something new. Out of his anguish he shall see light and find satisfaction. And then according to the parsing, and this is the person in my book, our book, 7 Stories, through his knowledge the righteous one, my servant, shall make many righteous. So that's an entirely appropriate or possible reading of the text. It's through his knowledge, not his substitution. It's what's going on inside here that he makes us righteous. And the way we get that is we look at him and say, oh my God, he's reacting to this brutality in a completely different way. That's a different knowledge because he's in relationship with God. He's called my servant. He's carrying out God's actuality in the world. And so that knowledge is then translated to us. Through his knowledge, we will become genuinely righteous through that transformed consciousness, shall we say, of the Christ, of Jesus. But that's whom we think the suffering servant eventually ends up as. Although he's very mysterious, he or she is very mysterious at this point and wonderful at this point. But when you get to Jesus, that's the whole point. You get to somebody who consciously takes on this role and this identity. The Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve. He's obviously echoing, like he echoed the Esau figure embracing Jacob. He's echoing 2nd Isaiah. He's textually dependent on 2nd Isaiah. It's not a dogmatic thing that comes out of the sky. He says, I'm going to be that person. I'm going to be the one who serves. And give my life as a ransom for many. And that makes sense. We're not being ransomed from the devil or from God, we're being ransomed from ourselves. Bought back from this false construct of foundational violence, sacrificial violence, which we have been all embedded in. And we've been ransomed, we've become new human beings out of that. So that's the 7 stories account of the exile, Deuteronomy, and 2nd Isaiah. And we take 26 weeks to go through that, if you do the program properly. But you have got the easy version and the clip, because you're ready for it, because you're up for it. So thank you.